The officer showed up on our porch on a rainy morning in March 2024 because of a ramp. Not loud music, not trash. A wooden ramp for my son's wheelchair. The HOA said it violated the aesthetic code. But what they didn't know, I spent 10 years in federal disability law, and I don't lose. My name is Rachel Morgan, I'm 42, and I've lived in Somerset Hills for almost 12 years. I'm a mom, a small business owner, and someone who never wanted a fight. Not with the neighbors, and definitely not with the HOA. But when my son, Eli, who's 11 and has spina bifida, needed a new ramp after a growth spurt, I didn't expect to be told his mobility was visually disruptive. Their exact words. In an email, see, for Eli, the ramp wasn't just wood and nails. It was freedom. It meant rolling outside to watch the wind stir the trees. It meant catching the bus without being carried. It meant dignity. And I'll be honest, I cried. Not because of the ramp, but because I realized this wasn't just about one structure. It was about control and discrimination dressed in bureaucracy. They gave me 14 days to take it down, or they'd fine me $200 a day. So if you're watching this, and you've ever had to fight for something small, something that meant everything, I want to hear from you. Drop your city in the comments. Because this story, it's not just about a ramp. It's about a mother who'd had enough. An HOA that picked the wrong family. And what happens when you take aesthetic violations to federal court. Stick around, because it starts quietly, with a notice on our door. But what it became changed more than just our neighborhood. We moved to Somerset Hills in early 2012, back when it was the kind of place that felt like a Norman Rockwell painting. White fences, block parties. People waved when they passed. I remember our first 4th of July here. Eli was just a baby. How our neighbors helped us set up a little tent so he wouldn't get too much sun. Life here was simple, and we liked it that way. I ran my bakery from home, and my husband Mark coached Little League on weekends. Eli, even with his condition, was thriving. He has a motorized chair and the sharpest wit of any kid I know. He's the kind of child who names squirrels and argues about space with Alexa. Our house sat on a gentle slope near the end of a cul-de-sac. Birds sang at sunrise, and you could smell jasmine in the evenings. We had a small porch, a flower bed, and a custom-made swing for Eli that a neighbor helped us build. For a long time, things felt like a shared dream. Even the HOA, for all its reputation, wasn't a problem back then. The board was mostly made up of retirees who cared more about community potlucks than measuring grass blades. One of them, Mrs. Lillian Hart, bless her, used to bake Eli cookies shaped like dinosaurs. She even knitted him a scarf for Christmas one year, with little embroidered wheelchair symbols along the border. I won't lie, when we added the first ramp years ago, we were nervous. We submitted the design, just like the guidelines required. It was wood, painted to match the house, and perfectly aligned with their measurements. The approval came through in 3 days. That was in 20. We thought, wow, this is how it's supposed to work. Over time, we upgraded the ramp. As Eli grew, his chair got heavier. We reinforced the planks, adjusted the slope, and added handrails for safety. Every time, we kept things neat, compliant, and transparent. No one ever complained. If anything, people admired the work. One neighbor even asked if we could help her son build one for his grandmother. Karen didn't exist yet. At least, not in our lives. Back then, her house 2 doors down belonged to a retired couple who grew hydrangeas and invited us over for tea. The kind of neighbors who reminded you why you put up with HOA fees in the first place. The kind who kept extra umbrellas on the porch, just in case. I still remember a chilly October morning in 2019, when Eli's chair battery died halfway up the driveway. Mr. Chapman, our old neighbor, came jogging down the hill in his robe just to give us a hand. He had arthritis in his knees, but he didn't hesitate. Then in late 2022, the neighborhood shifted. Houses sold fast, young professionals moved in. The HOA board changed hands, and with that came Karen Ellings, newly elected president of the HOA, a woman whose mission, as she described in the neighborhood newsletter, was to restore Somerset Hills to its full visual potential. We didn't know what that meant at first, but soon, the charm started draining out of our little cul-de-sac. Letters began appearing in mailboxes, notices about fence colors, driveways needing pressure washing, garden beds that weren't uniform. Solar lights suddenly needed approval. Decorative flags were discouraged. People started whispering. The block party got cancelled. Lillian moved away. But in our home, things were still good. Eli had just started middle school, and he was learning 3D modeling. He wanted to design prosthetics for kids someday. He said it helped to know what it's like to rely on something that most people never even think about. The new ramp, that was his idea. He sketched it out himself, in fact, said he wanted it wider and with gentler turns, so Grandma can use it too. We submitted the new plans in February 2024, right after Eli's growth spurt. Same materials, same alignment, just safer, smoother, more accessible. We didn't think twice, because for 12 years we'd done everything right. But this time, we never got a reply. Just silent. And then came March 3rd, 2024, the day the notice showed up taped to our front door. One sentence in bold red ink. You are in violation of HOA Guidelines Section 1. Unauthorized exterior modification. No signature, no context, just a deadline. Take it down within 4. I remember Eli reading it over my shoulder and saying, they forgot a period. He tried to make a joke out of it. That night, I didn't sleep. The house that had always felt like a sanctuary suddenly felt watched. And for the first time since moving here, I locked our mailbox. That was the last peaceful week we'd have. 2 days after the notice appeared, I got an email from Karen Ellings herself. The subject line read, Ramp, Non-Compliance, Follow-up. No greeting, just a PDF attachment of the HOA guidelines, highlighted, underlined, and annotated, like she was preparing for court. The note below read, this ramp does not match the approved plans filed in 20. It exceeds width limits and disrupts visual continuity of the block. Must be removed by March 17 to avoid daily penalties. It was signed, K.E., HOA President. That was the moment her name changed in my head, from Karen Ellings to just Karen. All caps. You know the type. Hair pulled tight like a statement. Clipboard energy. The kind of woman who frowns at chalk drawings and calls it graffiti. Until then, I'd only heard whispers about her. Apparently she'd already made an elderly couple repaint their door a less vibrant shade of blue and reported a veteran down the street for flying the flag outside of appropriate hours. Another neighbor told me she once threatened to fine a family $75 because their Halloween decorations featured a talking animatronic witch, which in her words created disruptive ambiance. Still, I thought we were safe. We had history here. We were careful. And most importantly, this was a medical necessity. I emailed her back. Politely, I attached Eli's pediatrician's note. I offered to revise the plans, meet in person, even offered to paint the ramp if it would blend more. No reply. Instead, the next day brought another letter. Certified, bold. And this time, it mentioned legal escalation. The tone had shifted from bureaucratic to hostile, and worse, she copied the entire HOA board. And our next-door neighbors. It's hard to describe what it feels like to suddenly be treated like a problem in your own neighborhood. Miss Kennedy, who used to wave each morning while walking her dog, now kept her head down. Doug, who helped us build Eli's planter box, suddenly started mowing right up to our fence line, but never spoke a word. One by one, familiar faces turned cold. Then came the property management firm. Karen had hired an external consultant to perform routine visual audits of all properties. Translation? Someone drove around with a clipboard and camera, taking pictures of people's yards and porches. Ours was visited twice in 1 week. It started to feel like surveillance. And then on March 10, we received a letter from the City Code Enforcement Office. Not the HOA. The notice claimed someone had reported us for unsafe construction and non-permitted alteration. It included language about potential city code violations and referenced community complaints. I called the inspector. He was polite but vague, said the complaint came from a private citizen in the HOA. Standard follow-up. Shouldn't be a problem, he added. Still, he scheduled an in-person inspection. We spent the next 24 hours cleaning everything. I swept the driveway, scrubbed the porch railings. Eli, despite his sore shoulders, insisted on helping. He raked leaves from the ramp and tried to repaint a chipped edge. He said, if it looks nice enough, maybe they'll leave us alone. When the inspector arrived, he wasn't alone. A uniformed police officer stood at the edge of our lawn. Standard protocol, they said. Sometimes these things escalate. A dispute over a ramp. Karen stood across the street the entire time. Arms crossed. Aviator sunglasses. Watching us, like she was staging a neighborhood coup. The inspector, to his credit, was thorough but kind. He measured the incline, checked the handrails, and finally said, "This isn't a city issue. It's ADA compliant. But your HOA? They seem eager." Before he left, he leaned closer and added, "Document everything. Just in case." That night, I found an anonymous flyer shoved in our mailbox. "If you can't follow community rules, maybe this isn't the place for you. Type. No return address." Eli found it before I did. He looked up at me and asked, "Should I take the ramp down? That sentence will haunt me for the rest of my life." He wasn't asking out of fear. He was asking out of guilt, because that's what the HOA wanted, to make a child feel like a burden in his own home. And I realized something in that moment. This wasn't about a ramp. This wasn't about rules. This was about power. And Karen, she was using the HOA like a weapon, pointed directly at my son. I stayed up that night reading the Fair Housing Act. I highlighted every line about disability access and reasonable accommodation. I opened my old law school folders and found my civil rights coursework. I hadn't practiced in nearly a decade, but this time, the case was mine. Because if Karen wanted a war, she just picked it with the wrong mother. The next week felt like something out of a slow-burning psychological thriller. First, we started noticing people walking by our home and stopping, not for a friendly chat, just stopping, stare. One man even took photos, blatantly, in front of Eli, who was wheeling himself down the ramp after school. When I confronted him, he mumbled something about documenting compliance and walked away. I tried to keep my voice steady in front of Eli, but inside, I was boiling. Then, the fines started. A letter dated March 17, 2024, the very deadline Karen had threatened, stated we were officially being fined $200 per day. It was written like a verdict. No appeal, no leniency, just a running total at the bottom. Current balance due. That was after 5 days. The next week, it ballooned to $400. I contacted the HOA accounting rep, Bethany Myers, someone I once carpooled with for a PTA bake sale, and asked her to explain the charges. She sounded nervous on the phone. "Rachel, I'm sorry, I was told not to discuss it. You should probably talk to Karen." Click. Even people who had once eaten my banana bread wouldn't speak to me now, and the hits kept coming. We received another letter on March 21, warning of possible legal referral if the balance exceeded. Karen was building a paper trail, aggressive, calculated, and cold. But beneath the legalese, I saw the strategy: delay, intimidate, crush us financially until we gave up. But I wouldn't give up. The next morning, another code violation arrived. This time, visual disharmony due to oversized planters. The planters were the same ceramic pots Eli had helped me paint years ago. His initials were still on the base of one tiny, in wobbly black ink. But the HOA had decided they didn't match the community aesthetic. By the end of the month, we'd received 7 violations, 4 warnings, 2 notices of lien intent, and a second city code inspection request. Each one strategically stacked to create a web of pressure. Karen even posted an article in the Somerset Hills HOA e-newsletter titled "Preserving Neighborhood Standards for Future Growth." It didn't name us, but every line screamed our story. Deviations from architectural consistency harm property value. Homeowners must remember that accessibility doesn't override design protocol. Exceptions become precedents. Precedents become problems. That final line, it was in bold. And then things turned personal. A photo of our ramp appeared in a private neighborhood Facebook group. Someone had captioned it, "What happens when the rules don't apply to everyone?" We were being painted as rule breakers, as freeloaders, as the family dragging the neighborhood down. Eli's best friend's mom uninvited him from a birthday sleepover. She claimed the guest list was too full. 2 days later, Eli saw the photos online. Everyone from his class was there. I found him crying quietly in his room, dismantling the Lego wheelchair he built in 3rd grade. He looked up and asked, "Mom, do they hate us?" I didn't have an answer. That was the day we stopped using the front door. We started entering through the garage. It felt safer somehow, less exposed. I began flinching every time the mailbox creaked. Eli started sleeping with headphones on. Even the dog stopped barking. Karen had turned our home into a pressure cooker. Every hour, the temperature rose. Not with yelling or noise, but with paper, letters, rules, silence. She knew exactly how to hurt us without ever raising her voice. But what she didn't know, I was keeping every piece, every envelope, every date, every quote. I started building a timeline, a case file, a paper fortress. I printed the Fair Housing Act, highlighted every section about disability accommodation. I filed requests for arbitration. I contacted the ADA Regional Enforcement Office. I emailed city council members. Some responded. Most didn't. I was exhausted. But I wasn't alone. Because that week, a letter arrived. Handwritten. Not folded. Not anonymous. It was from Mrs. Lillian Hart. She had moved to Florida last year to live with her daughter. But somehow she'd heard what was happening. Her note was simple. "This isn't the neighborhood we built. Fight back. Love, Lillian." Taped to the back was a photo. Eli, age 6, sitting on her lap with a cookie in each hand. That night, I cried. For the first time in weeks, not out of fear but out of fire. The pressure was building, but something stronger was rising underneath it. That photo from Mrs. Lillian Hart lit a fuse in me. I stopped acting like a target and started acting like a lawyer. I dusted off my old litigation files, opened a brand new binder, and wrote on the cover in bold marker, HOA v. Humanity. The first thing I did, print every single HOA communication, violation notice, and email. I color-coded them by date and theme, accessibility, aesthetics, surveillance, intimidation. The second thing I did, get a second opinion from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. I filed an official HUD complaint on March 31, 2024, citing violations under the Fair Housing Act, specifically discrimination based on disability. I included a 32-page PDF of evidence, emails, photos, inspection reports, and testimony from Eli's doctor. Then I reached out to Access for All, a nonprofit legal advocacy group that takes on HOA discrimination cases. They took one look at my file and called me within 48 hours. "You're sitting on a bombshell," the lawyer said. "Let us light the fuse." While they began prepping for federal escalation, I turned to the neighbors. Not the HOA loyalists who drank Karen's Kool-Aid, but the quiet ones, the fence sitters, the ones who used to wave before all this started. I printed flyers, walked door to door, held a private meeting in our garage. I didn't lead with legal terms. I led with Eli, with photos of him building planters and racing toy cars down the ramp when he was 7. A few people cried. Mr. Williams, whose wife used a walker, told me, "She's terrified of Karen. But you've reminded me that fear's not a policy." He signed our petition that night. We gathered 43 signatures in 3 days, enough to request a special hearing under HOA Bylaws Section 8, something Karen hoped we didn't know existed. But I knew, because I'd memorized the bylaw. I also knew that Karen's appointment to president hadn't followed proper procedure. The minutes from that meeting were never notarized. I filed a procedural challenge with the HOA's Oversight Committee. Suddenly, the emails from Karen got quieter, more careful, and then something remarkable happened. A former board member sent me a flash drive. No name, no return address, just a sticky note. "You didn't hear this from me." The flash drive contained audio recordings of a closed HOA strategy meeting from February 2024, 2 weeks before we submitted the new ramp plans. Karen's voice was crystal clear. "Once we shut down this ramp, we'll use it to clean up other houses too. Set a tone. Make an example." Another voice asked, "But what if it violates ADA law?" Karen laughed. "They won't fight back. They never do. She had said it, out loud, on tape. That was the moment I knew the game had changed. I contacted local reporter Dana Prescott, someone who covered city politics and HOA abuse stories. I sent her a curated version of our file and the recording. Within days, she called me back. I'm running it, and you're going to want to watch the 6 o'clock news. The story aired on April 14, 2024. They blurred our house, protected Eli's name, but didn't spare Karen. They played the audio clip, her laughing about making an example. That clip changed everything. Neighbors started texting me again. People who hadn't spoken to us in weeks sent baked goods and flowers. A group of teens from the neighborhood chalked the sidewalk outside our house with the words, "Ramps are freedom." For the first time in months, Eli smiled and asked if we could go outside and read on the porch. The next day, the city inspector, the same one from March, came by in plain clothes. He gave me a thumbs up and said, "Just so you know, someone higher up told us to stop responding to HOA complaints until this gets resolved." Then came the email from the HOA Oversight Committee. They had received my procedural challenge. A formal hearing was scheduled for April 20. Karen was required to attend. On April 16, I received a message from Access for All's legal team. HUD had formally opened an investigation. That meant subpoena power, a public record trail, and potential civil penalties against the HOA. And on top of that, I'd drafted a full federal complaint, citing 3 major violations: discriminatory enforcement of aesthetic standards, there's a failure to grant reasonable accommodation. Mark and I cleared the dining room table, turned it into a command center. We weren't just preparing for a neighborhood dispute. We were preparing for a reckoning. And for the first time in weeks, we weren't just preparing for a neighborhood dispute. We were preparing for a reckoning. The morning of April 21, 24, the community clubhouse was packed. Neighbors who hadn't shown up to an HOA meeting in years stood shoulder to shoulder, arms folded, waiting. Some brought lawn chairs, others brought receipts. Literally, printouts of fines and letters they'd received from Karen. There were murmurs, side eyes, and more than one folding table whisper of about time. The room buzzed with a strange tension. Not fear, anticipation, the kind of energy that crackles before a thunderstorm. Karen arrived 10 minutes late. She wore her signature sunglasses indoors and carried a binder twice the size of mine. Her smile was brittle. Her hair was tighter than usual. She was dressed in her usual palette of beige, like she hoped to blend in. But her eyes flicked when she saw the crowd. Not one chair left. Half the audience standing, a few recording. The oversight committee sat at the long table, up front. 3 members, all in matching navy polos to their credit. They took this seriously. Microphones. Note takers, a court stenographer. This was no longer a casual HOA slap on the wrist. It was a hearing. They opened the floor to me first. I stood up, took a breath, and felt my legs go steady. I'd spent 10 years outside a courtroom, but the rhythm came back like muscle memory. I started with the timeline, every violation, every letter. I projected the emails, highlighted the contradictions in her citations. I showed photos, side-by-side comparisons, of what we submitted versus what they accused. Then I played the tape. Karen's voice echoed through the room. "Once we shut down this ramp, we'll use it to clean up other houses too. Set a tone. They won't fight back. They never do." A ripple moved through the audience. Gasps. Audible wows. One woman covered her mouth. 2 others leaned forward in their seats. One man near the back shook his head and muttered, "Unbelievable." Karen didn't move. Her face was frozen, but her foot tapped steadily beneath the table. A metronome of unraveling control. I let the silence settle before I introduced the petition. 43 signatures, all local, all verified. People who lived within feet of each other, who'd once shared potlucks and block parties, now united by the same message. I read aloud from their statements. I was fined for wind chimes. Karen told me my welcome mat invited pests. This HOA is not about community anymore. It's about fear. Karen finally stood. She objected to the tape. "This recording is illegal. This entire process is inappropriate. If anyone felt targeted, That was not my intent. We are simply trying to uphold standards. It was legalese. Paper armor. But the words rang hollow. Then came the final blow. Natalie Park, the Access for All attorney, stepped up and calmly handed the committee a letter from HUD, confirming a federal investigation was active and ongoing. "Let me be perfectly clear," she said, voice calm. "If this board continues to fine or retaliate, they may be held personally liable for civil damages, including emotional distress, including punitive damages." Karen sat back down, hard. The committee turned to her. "Ellings, do you deny the authenticity of the recording?" Karen didn't answer. She just pressed her lips together. So the people spoke for her. Doug, the neighbor who'd once helped us build Eli's planter, stood and said, "I got a notice because my garbage bins weren't inside by 7 sharp. I work night shifts. I just wanted to live in peace." Mrs. Kennedy, who hadn't made eye contact with me for weeks, teared up and said, "Rachel, I'm sorry, I was scared. She made us all scared." Even Sophia, a teenage girl from the far end of the block, stood and said, "I have scoliosis. That ramp, it made me feel like people like me belonged here." One by one, they spoke. And with every voice, Karen got smaller. At last, the oversight committee took the mic. "We've heard the evidence, and we've reviewed the petition. We now issue the following ruling. All fines levied against the Morgan family are nullified, effective immediately. The ramp shall remain unmodified. The board will suspend all actions taken against this property until HUD concludes its investigation. Effective immediately. Karen Ellings is suspended from the HOA board, pending a formal review." There was no dramatic applause, just a long collective exhale. People nodded. A few wept quietly. Eli, sitting beside Mark in the 3rd row, clutched my hand. His fingers trembled, but they didn't let go. Karen gathered her binder without a word. She walked out of the clubhouse, binder clutched to her chest, into the daylight she could no longer control. Outside, kids played hopscotch in the parking lot. One of them had drawn a ramp in chalk, complete with a tiny stick figure boy and a flag that read, "Be kind." That night, as I stepped onto our porch, the wind picked up, warm and easy. Eli rolled out beside me, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. Across the street, a porch light blinked in quiet solidarity, and taped to our mailbox was a handwritten note. It said, "Thank you for fighting." That note stayed on our mailbox for 2 days. We didn't take it down, not because we needed the reminder, but because it felt like a punctuation mark. Like someone finally closed the sentence we'd been trapped inside for months. Eli started sitting on the porch again, not just sitting, thriving. He rejoined the neighborhood robotics club. We planted new herbs together. His laugh came back. He even painted a sign for the ramp that read, "Access is not an eyesore." The ramp stayed. Of course it did. Untouched, unchallenged. The vines we'd once trimmed back had started curling around its rails again, this time like a gentle embrace rather than a warning. But the fallout from the hearing didn't stop there. Within 2 weeks, Karen Ellings formally resigned from the HOA board. No apology letter, no speech, just a typed note submitted to the committee and a for sale sign on her lawn the next morning. Her house sold within 3 weeks to a couple with a son in a wheelchair. Poetic doesn't even begin to cover it. Meanwhile, the federal investigation continued. HUD followed up with interviews, document reviews, and site visits. I handed over everything. So did others. The HOA was placed under temporary compliance monitoring. All new board members had to attend ADA sensitivity training. They even asked me to help rewrite the community bylaws. So I did. I sat at that long folding table in the clubhouse with a red pen and a stack of rules written in lawyer speak and fear. I crossed out vague words like unsightly and non-harmonious. I added clear language on disability accommodation. I included a clause that required any aesthetic rule be evaluated through a lens of function and dignity. The final clause in the new code: no rule shall ever be enforced in a way that shames, isolates, or discriminates against those who require accessibility. Unanimously approved. We even renamed the committee. It's now the Community Standards and Accessibility Board, not just about rules, but about values. The neighborhood began to shift again. Not fast, but genuinely. Mrs. Kennedy started a weekly gardening club. Doug built a small tool-sharing shed for the cul-de-sac. Teenagers helped repaint fences, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. It felt like we'd wrestled the spirit of the place back from bureaucracy. And then something I didn't expect, messages from other towns. Emails? Social media DM. People who saw the story on the news or read the headline online. Mom turns HOA nightmare into national disability victory. One woman in North Carolina wrote me to say her HOA had made her move her mother's oxygen ramp to the back of the house because it wasn't pretty. She'd thought about moving out. Now, she was organizing a neighborhood petition. Someone from Oregon reached out to say she was going to law school because of Eli. And from Texas, a veteran who said his son, also in a wheelchair, watched our story on the news and asked, "Are we allowed to fight back too?" That one made me cry. Because yes, we are. And not just with lawyers, with truth, with documents, with community, with porch signs and handshakes, and the courage to knock on a door and say, "I think this is wrong." Eli flourished. He hosted a ramp design day with kids from all over the district. Some in chairs, others just curious. They decorated ramps with art, chalk. One girl brought fairy wings. Another wrote in marker, "Accessibility is freedom." We laminated that one. It hangs above our pantry now. I stood on the porch that evening, watching them play, and I felt something settle in me. Not revenge. Not even pride. Just, and maybe that's the real ending. Not Karen's downfall. Not the HOA's retreat. Not the signatures or suspensions or even the revised bylaws. No, the real ending is quieter. It's the way the mail comes now without dread. The way Eli no longer asks if we're in trouble. The way neighbors smile longer, wave slower, linger in conversation. It's the knowledge that we made something better, not just for us, but for the next family who builds a ramp, installs solar panels, or raises backyard chickens in defiance of bland conformity. And maybe that's why I kept the sign. The one Eli made after it was all over. The one he painted in blue and green, with stars and a tiny chalkboard underneath. It hangs right above the ramp. Every now and then we change the mess. This week it reads, "Betty laid her 500th egg last week, and I laid down the law." Have you ever had to fight for something that should have been simple, just to feel at home in your own home? Tell us where you're watching from. Drop your story in the comments, or tag someone who needs to hear this. Because HOA overreach isn't just annoying, it can be dangerous. And sometimes, all it takes is one person to push back, so others can finally breathe. Like, share, subscribe, and remember, the ramp stayed, the family stayed, and this time, the HOA backed down.